The internet is abuzz with the question: did Pope Francis lie? Did he deceive the church when he issued Traditionis Custodes? Because Pope Francis originally claimed that the traditional Latin Mass that had been expanded by John Paul II and especially by Pope Benedict XVI had caused problems in the church, and that bishops had come to him, Pope Francis, and requested a restriction on the traditional Latin Mass. The questionnaire went out to the bishops in 2020, and then in 2021, Pope Francis issued his infamous motu proprio, Traditionis Custodes, saying that the traditional Latin Mass needed to be heavily restricted, and it was a moment of deep and profound sadness for many Catholics who love the traditional Latin Mass. And the great journalist Diane Montana has broken this story. She has obtained the previously undisclosed documents, the document prepared in response to the questions sent out to the bishops. And what she found is the report is extremely positive about the implementation of Summorum Pontificum and the traditional Latin Mass and its integration with the local diocese and with the local bishop. And so that raises the question, why was this document suppressed? Why was it hidden? And then why did Pope Francis come out and say, well, I took a questionnaire in 2020 and then the results said traditional Latin Mass is bad for the church, so I have to restrict it. What exactly is going on? I would encourage you to read the full article on Diane Montana's Substack. You can see it on the screen there. Exclusive official Vatican report exposes major cracks in foundation of Traditionis Custodes. I've also linked it in the show notes below so that you can read the whole thing. Here's the background story. All right. In 1970, the New Order of the Mass, as it said in Latin, the Novus Ordo Missae, was published. And throughout the world, in every single diocese of the world, except for maybe Campos in Brazil. And there was a reaction by many Catholics who said, I don't want to worship in the new Mass. I'm happy with the old Mass. It's like the analogy that I've made before. It's like you have all these chess players. They've been playing chess. There's a set of rules for each piece, for check, for checkmate. And the World Chess Federation says, well, we're going to change the way that bishops work. Bishops can now move over pieces, or pawns can now jump pieces like in checkers. It's still kind of chess, and it has all the looks and features of chess, but there's some newness to it. And it's perfectly fine for people playing the older form traditional chess to say, no, we want to play the older traditional chess. And it's not fair for the people who introduce the new version of chess to then say, well, you hate chess. You don't really believe in chess. You're not playing chess like the way we want you to play chess. People are just saying, I want to worship at the Mass of my grandfather and my great-grandfather, etc. And it edifies me, it draws me closer to Jesus, and there's nothing sinful or wrong about the traditional Latin Mass, because if there was something wrong about the traditional Latin Mass, that means all those tens of thousands of saints, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of saints, who worshipped at the altar at the traditional Latin Mass had some form of malformed piety or a deficient rite. And the Council of Trent says anyone who says that the traditional Latin Mass is deficient is anathema. So we can't have that, right? And so what happened is in 2007, Pope Benedict XVI issued a motu proprio called Summorum Pontificum. And this allowed for every single Roman Rite Catholic priest to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass without any permission from the Holy See, without any permission from the local bishop. Basically, Pope Benedict XVI said, we have the ordinary form of the Novus Ordo, we have the extraordinary form of the traditional Latin Mass with the books of 1962, and both are free to exist. If priests like the traditional Mass, they can say the traditional Mass. If they want to say the new Mass, they can say the new Mass. Lay people, they can go where they want as well. There's no harm here. And Pope Benedict says that which has been, I don't have the quote exactly, but that which has been revered for centuries cannot now be abrogated, referring to the traditional Latin Mass. That was a great solution things were going well. The traditional Latin Mass was growing, especially during the COVID years, 2020. And Pope Francis responded by sending out a questionnaire to the world bishops who responded, and then a report was made. We never saw that report. Diane Montana has access to that report. And Pope Francis said, well, I read the report and these bishops are having problems with the Latin Mass. Here's actually what Pope Francis wrote in the letter that went along with Traditionis Custodes. He says, regrettably, quote, regrettably, the pastoral objection, sorry, I'll repeat it. Let me start over. Quote, regrettably, the pastoral objective of my predecessors has often been seriously disregarded. An opportunity offered by St. John Paul II, and with even greater magnanimity by Pope Benedict XVI, was exploited to widen the gaps, reinforce the divergences, and encourage disagreements that injure the Church, block her path, and expose her to the peril of division, end quote. Pope Francis says that the generosity of John Paul II and the even greater magnanimity of Pope Benedict XVI, referring to Summorum Pontificum, quote, was used to widen the gaps, so the Latin Mass widened gaps, reinforce divergences, encourage disagreements that injure the Church. So Pope Francis is even saying the TLM, by having more of it in the world, it's being used to injure the Church. And then he says, block her path, block the path of the Church. The traditional Latin Mass being celebrated as blocking the path of the Church, Pope Francis. And then finally, quote, expose her, the Church, to the peril of division. So the generous application of John Paul II and Benedict XVI has now been thwarted, so that the traditional Latin Mass is doing all of these dangerous, harmful things to the Church. Therefore, Pope Francis says, I need to restrict the traditional Latin Mass. And this is why he issued in 2021, July 16th, a fateful day, I remember it clearly, he promulgated Traditionis Custodes. And he said it was in response to the questionnaire. He says, it revealed a situation that preoccupies and saddens me and persuades me of the need to intervene. So just so you get your facts right, Pope Francis says, I did the questionnaire, I got the responses, and quote, it revealed a situation that preoccupies and saddens me and persuades me of the need to intervene. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that say, oh, this is Taylor Marshall's fault. He made a bunch of podcasts about the Latin Mass, and he talked about Pope Francis and all these things. And so Pope Francis watched the Taylor Marshall video, and then he wrote Traditionis Custodes, and he issued the motu proprio, and everyone in the world in the traditional community is suffering because Taylor Marshall. But look at what Pope Francis actually says. I don't think it was because of a dad on a webcam on YouTube. Pope Francis said that the responses in the questionnaire from the bishops, quote, revealed a situation that preoccupies and saddens me and persuades me of the need to intervene. And his intervention, he says, was prompted by the questionnaire of the bishops. We now have access to that questionnaire, that report, and it's all positive. Something is amiss here. How is the questionnaire positive about the implementation of the traditional Latin Mass? The bishops are optimistic generally about it, and we're going to go through what they're optimistic about with the traditional Latin Mass. And yet Pope Francis read it, and he said it preoccupies him and saddens him, and he says, I need to intervene. And then he goes on to say that the bishops told him that it was causing problems, leading to blocking the path of the Church, and even potentially, God forbid, schism. So today we are going to look at this research that Diane Montana has said. Again, the link is below. If you want to read her full report, you can go over to her Substack, Diane Montana. and read the whole thing. We are going to be covering it today. Before I jump into it, I do want to honor today's sponsor, and it's Liver Health Formula. You know, as we get older, even young people now, they're sluggish, they struggle to get through the day, they feel weighed down, and the culprit, scientists are finding, doctors are finding, is right under your nose. It's a sluggish, overworked liver. And the reality is, because, as we were talking about yesterday in my show, because of glyphosate and fertilizers and GMOs and environmental toxins and processed foods and microplastics and who knows what they're putting in that fast food and that soy that you might be eating, fluoride. Over time, this takes a toll on your liver. Your liver is trying to filter out all this garbage, and it gets exhausted. And over 100 million Americans now suffer from an overworked and sluggish liver, according to the American Liver Foundation. That's 1 in every 3 Americans are struggling with their liver. So if you're ready to reclaim your vitality, I highly recommend giving your liver the support it needs with the Liver Health Formula from our sponsor, Pure Health Research. There's a special offer just for my audience. If you use the promo discount code Taylor, you'll receive 35% off when you check out, and I highly recommend it. It contains cutting-edge supplements of 11 powerful, clinically proven natural ingredients to detoxify and rejuvenate your liver at a cellular level so you experience more energy and optimized metabolism. And they've already helped over 2 million Americans. So it's time that you join their ranks and got back to feeling your best. Strengthen your liver. Of course, eat clean, but if there's damage there, you need help, and Liver Health Formula is the solution for you. So they've offered a special discount to my listeners, and you can get a 35% off when you check out using the discount code Taylor, Taylor, at purehealthresearch.com. Just enter the discount code Taylor, Taylor, at purehealthresearch.com. You can use the QR code on the screen or go directly to purehealthresearch.com and make sure you use that promo code Taylor. There's also a link in the show notes that you can click as well and get started in feeling your best again. purehealthresearch.com, promo code Taylor. All right, back to feeling our best in the church. I'm so relieved that Diane Montana has discovered the truth behind this, and it raises the question for us, what were the intentions of Pope Francis, and was Pope Francis being dishonest? You know, it's sad in a way that this came out after Pope Francis has died, and maybe that was by design. Maybe somebody leaked it after he died, right? If this had come out during his life, it would have to be addressed directly by him. Y'all see that? It's a big problem. So we're going to look at what Diane Montana has found. We're going to look at what the bishops have said. And I want to take a moment here, because yesterday in my podcast, I was talking about the new votive mass for the care of creation. And I also talked about the Mayan Rite Mass and the Amazonian Rite Mass. And I jokingly, rhetorically talked about how I wanted to start a Cowboy Texas Rite Mass, a mass that helps indigenous Texans feel welcome in the Catholic Church. And it was a joke. It was a way of saying, you know, if Mayans are going to have their mass and Amazonians are going to have the mass, then maybe Texans should have their own mass. And, you know, I talked about, you know, I wanted the priest to say, "The Lord be with y'all," and wear denim chasubles and cowboy boots and spurs. And the sacristy would have swinging saloon doors, and maybe, you know, ride in on a horse, and there could be music like rolling, 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 though the streams are swollen. And for the Kyrie, they'd just say, "Mercy me, mercy me." And the Sanctus bell would be like a chuck wagon triangle, like ding, 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 ding. Obviously, this was joking around, but I was shocked to read the comments and see people say, "I can't believe you, Taylor Marshall. I thought you were traditional. You're promoting a Texan Rite Mass. How dare you? You've sold out." My wife was reading the comments. She's like, babe, did you see some of the comments? I was like, about me wanting to have a Texan Rite Mass. She's like, yeah. She's like, are people that ignorant that they think that you want to start the Texan Rite Mass, the TRM, which by the way is my initials, TRM. It's a joke. Wink, wink. And I was like, babe, this is why Joe Rogan says he doesn't read his YouTube comments. There's just insanity, and people want to vilify you and take things you say and twist them and say, Taylor Marshall wants to start the Texan Rite Mass with priests in denim vestments and cowboy boots and a chuck wagon triangle for the Sanctus Bell. And I'm just amazed, And then Joy also said, you're going to get a haircut before your podcast. I said, yeah, I need to get. She's like, you look like a wild man. I know. I'm out here in the country. I haven't got my hair cut. But anyway, I just wanted to make a caveat, a public service announcement, that when I talked about starting the Texan Rite Mass, it was facetious. I was joking around. I don't really want a Texan Rite Mass with priests in stone-washed denim vestments saying, the Lord be with y'all. I don't want that. All right, back to Pope Francis and back to this situation. So again, Diane Montana, she's got the receipts. She's got the goods. She says that she has received the previously undisclosed documents that give a different story to what Pope Francis claimed to happen with the bishops. And the summary of the document has a lot of positive takeaways. She gives 7 positive takeaways that are in the document that was given to Pope Francis. And according to her, and from one source, Pope Francis not only had this report, but according to reliable sources, literally snatched a working copy out of Cardinal Ladaria's hands during an audience, telling him he wanted it immediately because he was curious about it. So clearly Pope Francis was passionate about this document. He allegedly, from numerous sources, snatched it out of another cardinal's hand, said he was very curious about it, and now it's public. Unless this is a complete fake forgery, which I don't believe it is, Diane Montana has been trustworthy for a long time. Here are the key takeaways that Diane Montana, and again, you can read the whole thing at her Substack in the link below. A lack of liturgical peace and unity is due more to a minority of bishops than to adherence to the traditional Roman liturgy. The report recalls Benedict XVI's desire to achieve, through the implementation of Summorum Pontificum, an internal liturgical reconciliation within the Church, and his recognition of the need to proceed not according to a hermeneutic of rupture, but rather by renewal in continuity with tradition. So Pope Benedict is saying, by just having the traditional Latin Mass in the house, right, in the environment, it points to a hermeneutic of continuity and a renewal of continuity with tradition. When people see the traditional Latin Mass, and then they see the Novus Ordo being abused with sacrilegious Eucharistic abuse, they can say, no. We know what the Mass was like before and during Vatican II, and now it's being implemented is liturgical abuse. So in a way, it provides a safety. The report also says the ecclesiological dimension of the hermeneutic of continuity with tradition and with the coherent renewal and development has not yet been fully embraced by some bishops. However, where it has been received and implemented, it is already bearing fruit, the most visible of which is in the liturgy. Furthermore, the report laments, in some dioceses, the forma extraordinaria, the extraordinary form, is not considered a richness for the life of the Church, but rather an inappropriate, disturbing, and useless element for the ordinary pastoral life, and even as dangerous, and therefore something not to be granted, or to be suppressed, or at least strictly controlled, so that it does not spread in hope of an eventual disappearance or abrogation. More specifically, Diane Montana says the report found that bishops in Spanish-speaking regions generally seem to show little interest in implementing Summorum Pontificum, despite requests by the faithful. So there's requests for it, and the report saying that some are not corresponding with Summorum Pontificum. The complaint here is not that lay people are being schismatic, it's that lay people have a desire for it and some bishops are not meeting that desire. The report noted some bishops state that the motu proprio Summorum Pontificum has failed in its aim of fostering reconciliation and therefore request its suppression, either because internal reconciliation with the Church has not yet been fully achieved, or because the priestly fraternity of St. Pius X has not returned to full communion in the Church. Montana says, in response, the authors observe that the process of reconciliation in the Church is often slow and gradual, and they recall, as Pope Benedict XVI himself did, that Summorum Pontificum was not intended for the SSPX. So if the complaint is, we tried Summorum Pontificum and the SSPX still exists, Pope Benedict says that's not the point of Summorum Pontificum. Number two, Diane Montana explains, majority of bishops who implemented Summorum Pontificum expressed satisfaction with it. The report says, quote, the majority of the bishops who responded to the questionnaire who have generously and intelligently implemented Summorum Pontificum ultimately express satisfaction with it, end quote. If the report says Pope Francis sent out a questionnaire and the questionnaire came back majority in support of Summorum Pontificum in the traditional Latin Mass, how did Pope Francis in 2021, 1 year later, say, we are restricting the traditional Latin Mass, I have heard from the bishops, and they are troubled. They have asked me to restrict it. It would seem that the majority were in favor of it. There was a minority that was vocal, perhaps someone like Cardinal Supich or someone like that. So I guess in a sense you could say that Pope Francis wasn't lying. He was just listening to the minority voice. Those who say that the Latin Mass is dangerous and schismatic. But here the official report says explicitly, quote, the majority of bishops who responded to the questionnaire and who have generously and intelligently implemented the motu proprio Summorum Pontificum ultimately express satisfaction with it, end quote. Also, the majority of bishops who responded to the questionnaire state that making legislative changes to the motu proprio Summorum Pontificum would cause more harm than good, end quote. So the majority of bishops who responded to Pope Francis in the questionnaire said, do not make legislative changes. Keep it as it is. Pope Francis then said, I'm going to make legislative changes and not keep it as it is. I'm going to change everything globally. So we have two different stories going on here. The official report, which says the majority of bishops are optimistic. Francis saying, the bishops told me this is a disaster, I have to intervene. Number three, the bishops are grateful for the competence for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, fourth section, the disbanded Ecclesia Dei. The report stressed the importance of stable groups and communities having a complete interlocutor at the institutional level, that is, at the Holy See. The report notes that careful oversight carried out by those with experience and expertise helps to, quote, prevent arbitrary forms of self-management and anarchy within the groups, as well as abuses of power by some local bishops. So one of the things Pope Francis did is he disbanded the Pontifical Commission of Ecclesia Dei. It was located inside the dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, and it was within the curia of the Roman See in the most important dicastery, the Doctrine of the Faith. And all the Latin Mass questions and Latin Mass communities, like the Fraternity of St. Peter, etc., their interface with the Pope and with the Holy See was through the dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith under the commission of Ecclesia Dei. That was the structure. Francis obliterated that. He abolished that, and they no longer interface with the dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. And he placed the Latin Mass communities like Institute of Christ the King and Fraternity of St. Peter, and he transferred them into the dicastery for consecrated life, for religious. And then he placed a woman as prefect head of it to run that. So now, instead of dealing directly with the doctrine of the faith with their own special pontifical commission, Ecclesia Dei, now they're in a bigger group for religious orders, and now they have to answer to a woman prefect. That's what Francis did. Drastic changes. Whereas the majority of bishops said they liked having a competent expertise apparatus in the Vatican for the traditional Latin Mass priests and communities to have an interface with Rome. Again, we're hearing two different stories. We're hearing the Pope Francis version, and then now, for the first time, we're seeing this official report version, which is contradicting at almost every point the claims made by Pope Francis before he died. Number 4, according to Diane Montana, this is her summarizing the document. The report confirmed attraction of young people to the traditional Latin Mass. Here's what the report, which has now been released, says, quote, "A constant observation made by the bishops is that it is young people who are discovering and choosing this older form of the liturgy. The majority of the stable groups present in the Catholic world are composed of young people, often converts to the Catholic faith, or those returning after a time away from the church and the sacraments. They are drawn," listen to this, my friends, "they are drawn to the sacredness, seriousness, and solemnity of the liturgy. What strikes them most, also amid a society that is excessively noisy and verbose, is the discovery of silence within sacred actions. The restrained and essential words, preaching that is faithful to the Church's doctrine, the beauty of liturgical chant, and the dignity of the celebration, a seamless whole that is deeply attractive." I mean, chef's kiss right there. Young people are attracted to the sacredness and the mystery, which is something that Pope Leo said within the first few days of his papacy. We in the West, we in the Roman Rite, need to return our liturgies to the mystery and reverence. And he cites the Eastern Catholic liturgies as providing inspiration in a way. And young people want to find that way. We young people live with cell phones and alarms on their phones and buzzes and texts and DMs and nonstop streaming. They have access to so much. What they find in the traditional Latin Mass is an enclave of silence, recollection, mystery, and mystagogy. The report says that's positive. Francis took a different course of action. Number 5 out of the 7, Diane Montana reports that this report highlighted growth in vocations. The report says many young men are choosing to enter the Ecclesia Dei institutes for their priestly or religious formation rather than the diocesan seminaries, to the manifest regret of some bishops. So here we can see a bittersweet pill. The positive is we have a lot of men wanting to become Catholic priests, having vocations, and they want the Latin Mass. They're going to the seminaries of the Fraternity of St. Peter, Institute of Christ the King, traditional orders, maybe even the Society of St. Pius X. And we know those groups are having an explosion of vocations to the priesthood. And this point says, to the regret of some bishops. It would be hard, let's say you're the bishop of a Midwestern diocese, and you need vocations, you need priests. And, let's say that there's 2 young men who feel like they have a vocation, they want to be a priest. Traditionally, they just would have gone into the diocese, into the diocesan seminary and be priests for that diocese. But these young men are thinking, well, I really want to say the traditional Latin Mass. I want to be a traditional priest. I want to wear the cassock. I want to go to seminary where I won't be taught liberal theology. I want to go to seminary where I learn Thomas Aquinas and Latin and St. Augustine and, the church fathers. That's what I want to do. So they choose to go to a traditional seminary. And you can, if you're a bishop, you're like, oh, that guy ideally should be a priest for me, but he's going to the traditional seminary. A solution to that would be, hear me out, the bishop says, yeah, you can come under me in my diocese, go to seminary, and you can say Latin Mass here in the diocese. And then you would begin to keep those guys. And that actually started happening under Pope Benedict XVI. What Pope Francis did is he shut it down. And now those young men who are maybe not sure, should I go diocesan? Should I go to a traditional seminary? They're just like, whatever. I'm going to the Fraternity of St. Peter. I'm going to Institute of Christ the King. I'm going to SSPX. So what Pope Francis has done has actually made that issue worse. He should have kept the way of Pope Benedict. Number 6, according to Diane Montana, the report recommended studying both forms of the Roman Rite as part of seminary formation. So these bishops who realize this is happening, they're like, okay, well, how do we fix this? How do we keep those solid Catholic young men in our diocese? We recommend that in seminary, in the diocesan seminary, the young men, the seminarians, learn and study both forms. They learn the Novus Ordo, the ordinary form. They learn the traditional Latin Mass, the extraordinary form. The report suggested, based on the ideas proposed by bishops, that sessions dedicated to the study of both forms of the Roman Rite be incorporated in seminary formation. Francis went 100% against this, and he said seminarians cannot be taught the Latin Mass, and they cannot celebrate the Latin Mass once they're ordained priests. I mean, it's almost like Pope Francis read this document, and on each of these bullet points, he said to himself, do the opposite, do the opposite, do the opposite, do the opposite. And then he issued Traditionis Custodes, and then when he put out his letter, why did you do this? Why did you do this, Pope Francis? He said, well, I consulted the bishops, and this is what we had to do. Is that right? And then the last point in the document, the report recommended let the lay people be free to choose. Let the people be free to choose. And recalling a bishop's irreplaceable, albeit sometimes challenging role and duty before God to tend the flock, the report ends with Pope Benedict XVI's words to the bishops of France in 2008. This is Pope Benedict. Quote, I am aware of your difficulties, but I do not doubt that within a reasonable time you can find solutions satisfactory for all, lest the seamless tunic of Christ be further torn. Everyone has a place in the church. Every person, without exception, should be able to feel a home and never rejected. God, who loves all men and women and wishes none to be lost, entrusts us with the mission by appointing us shepherds of his sheep. We can only thank him for the honor and the trust that he has placed in us. Let us therefore strive always to be servants of unity. So if that's the recommendation of the report, which is very generous and very much in line with Pope Benedict, why did Pope Leo do the opposite? When I was in Rome, I met with a cardinal, and we talked about this. And I said, was Pope Benedict saddened by these things as he saw them happening? And the cardinal said, yes, he was saddened. So much of what Pope Benedict worked for, and you can see in that quote that I just read by Pope Benedict, that the bishops and the priests are appointed as shepherds of the sheep, and God wishes none to be lost, none to be excluded, and ends with saying we can only thank God for the honor and trust that he has placed on us and to be servants of unity. And I'll tell you, I go to a traditional Latin Mass every Sunday. I'm very much plugged into the traditional Latin Mass landscape. I would say, since this happened in 2021, people are angry, but I think generally the sense I get is that people are hurt and people are kind of run down. There was a fatigue that set in at this point. There was a lot of confusion beginning around 2016-17 with Pope Francis and Amoris Laetitia. That was a big thing. 2019, Pachamamas, and then 2021. This was the one, though, that stung the most, because it wasn't just something that you read on LifeSite News or on blogs. This was the one where your pastor had to get up in the pulpit and say, as of such and such date, we're not having the traditional Latin Mass anymore because of Pope Francis. That was the deep groan. That was the hurt in the gut. And people are injured. And a lot of people look at Pope Leo and they're like, well, I don't know. Is he Francis 2.0? And is Francis any better? And look at the appointments that Leo is making. And, there's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of, suspicion about Pope Leo. But there's also a lot of joy. And I've been trying to take the white pills and distribute the white pills to you and trying to be joyful. And I went to Rome. I wanted to see Pope Leo. I wanted to talk to people in Rome and get the perspective from ground zero. And I think what we're seeing is a hope that Pope Leo will live the words of Pope Benedict, that every person without exception should be able to feel at home and never rejected. God who loves all men and wishes none to be lost. Francis, I think, was willing to roll the dice and have people get ticked off and become sede vacantes. Who cares? Become Eastern Orthodox. Who cares? To go into irregular situations, have schismatic mentalities. Who cares about those people? It seems like Pope Benedict, and I do believe Pope Leo, has a more calm, slow, deliberate, and pastoral approach to the papacy. And with that, there was big news today, or was it yesterday, that in Texas, we have had, during the pontificate of Pope Leo, the first extension of the ban of a traditional Latin Mass. It's in San Angelo, Texas. It's not close to where I live, but I know San Angelo. They applied, I think through their bishop, for an extension for Traditionis Custodes not to restrict their traditional Latin Mass in San Angelo, Texas. And under Pope Leo, it came back a 2-year extension. Now, that has been received by people in two different ways. Some people are like, that's a W, that's a win. Okay, Pope Leo is going to give extensions. Pope Leo is not as draconian as Pope Francis. Something is in the works. And then other people are saying, well, gee, that's only 2 years. This just shows that we're still persecuted. And my approach to that, it's like, you don't want to be the kid who asked for a bicycle for his birthday. And then you get it. And then you're like, but I didn't want the blue one. I wanted the red one. Like, take the dub. Take the W. Let's see what will happen. Because already in North Carolina, the bishop said, if Pope Leo changes the rules, I'll conform to them. And I'm extending the restrictions on the Latin Mass. Now we had a direct appeal here in Texas, at San Angelo, Texas, to the Vatican, and a 2-year reprieve was granted. Something seems to be going on. And it's positive. Let's take the W. I'm happy to have egg on my face if y'all all want to say, I told you so, you're naive, you were taking the white pills, we were taking the black pills, we were right. I'm fine with that. But I have a sense in my prayers, not that I'm a prophet or anything, I have a sense in the gestures and in these little things. I'm not happy about some of these appointments, but in these two things in the United States, both in North Carolina, an extension by the bishop, which I think was probably imposed or at least indicated by Rome, and then now an official 2-year extension in San Angelo, Texas. This could be the beginning of many extensions while a new motu proprio is put into place. I don't think that Pope Leo wants his first papal document to be a motu proprio overturning Francis. I think there's reasons for that, but I do think, hopefully, that Pope Leo will prepare a motu proprio, and I hope it's a Return Summorum Pontificum. With that being said, I am going to go to your questions and your comments. I also want to encourage you all to pre-order my new book, Christian Patriot. And this book is a manifesto on Christians retaking the public square, removing degeneracy, redefining marriage, redefining family, imposing it upon the public space using natural law and divine revelation. This is what Christians have been doing since the time of Constantine. We need to be reminded of the vocation of Christianity in the political realm. Most people just assume separation of church and state is the way it should be, and it's the way it always should be. But Catholic philosophers, theologians, popes have had many things to say. And so this book is a manifesto. The foreword's written by Harrison Butker, the 3-time NFL Super Bowl championship kicker for the Chiefs. And I give 12 ways to create one nation under God. One of those ways is banning pornography. Another one of those ways is bringing an end to federally supported abortion. Another one of those ways is defining marriage the way God defines marriage. Doesn't matter what a Supreme Court or any document says marriage is. The only one who can define marriage is the creator of marriage, and that is God, and we must insist on it. So I'm going to show you how you can do that at the low level, at the high level, and the name of the book is Christian Patriot. We want this to be a New York Times bestseller. I want this book to deeply affect conservative voices, MAGA, all those groups who are conservative. I want to challenge them with the question, what are we conserving as conservatism? And if we aren't conserving Christian culture, we're doing it wrong. So I encourage you to pre-order, buy 1, 2, 3 pre-ordered copies at christianpatriotbook.com. Also at christianpatriotbook.com, you can buy signed copies, and there's some other promotional things there as well. So check it out, christianpatriotbook.com. And also, if you want to take online courses with me this summer, we have a whole course on the traditional Latin Mass. I teach you how to say all the Latin prayers in the Latin Mass, the lay responses. I give you a full walkthrough of the entire Latin Mass. What does it mean? Why is the priest doing things? Where did all these customs and prayers come from? I give you a full walk down. So if you're interested in taking my online course on the traditional Latin Mass and the Roman Rite, go to nsti.com, but even better, below me on YouTube is a special link where you can start those classes for $1. $1. So if you want to start that and get my 11 other online courses in Catholic philosophy, theology, Catholic Old Testament, Catholic New Testament, Catholic Church history, it's all there. You can get started for $1, $1. New St. Thomas Institute, and the link is below me on YouTube. I believe it's the first or second link. So check it out. All right, go into your comments, your questions. We got a bunch of super chats stacked up. First one is Tales from Under the Moon. With such revelation, I'm not surprised why I can't pray for Pope Francis's soul. Lo, I got a dream that he is in hell. Okay, well, look, dreams aren't infallible. I don't know where he's at. I went to Rome, and I went before the tomb of Pope Francis, and I prayed for the repose of his soul. So I would encourage everyone to pray for the repose of his soul. If he were not to be saved, that prayer, that suffrage would be applied to another soul in purgatory, so it's not lost. I don't know if y'all know that. If you pray for someone's soul to get out of purgatory and they're trapped in hell forever, your prayer is applied to another soul in purgatory, so it's never wasted. Burn. Only if we get a Michigan Rite Mass where the priest wear Detroit Tiger hats, Carhartt robes, we start the Mass with, how's it going? And what up, doe? There we go. I mean, if we're going to have Mayan Rite and Amazonian Rite, I want Texan Rite where it's like, the Lord be with y'all. And we got the dinner bell and the denim vestments. And yeah, why not have a Michigan Rite Mass? Detroit gear, merch, Carhartt robes. How's it going? I mean, where does it end? And by the way, for all the people who are going to criticize me, I'm joking. I don't want a Texan right mass. I don't want a Michigan right mass. All right, we're just having fun here on the Dr. Taylor Marshall podcast. Take a chill pill and take a white pill. Quid est veritas. Today is the first day of Weisenberger's TLM ban in Detroit. Pope Leo was made a deacon in Detroit by original James Martin pro-Bishop Gumbleton. Pope Leo turns the church back towards tradition. Yeah, this is not good. My heart goes out to everybody up there in Detroit. It's a horrible situation. I hope something can be done. Sadly, the outcry against what was being this ban in Detroit did not receive the same public media support as the Catholics did down in Charlotte, North Carolina. I don't know why that is, but this is very sad. Our heart goes out to you, and I just pray there's some solution or some overturning here in the near future. Barron is back. I'm glad we had Francis. Traditional-minded Catholics would never have been mobilized without him. Thank you, modernist. You dead. And I don't know what exactly that means, but I don't know how I feel about that. Another super chat from Byrne. He's on a roll. Archbishop of Detroit isn't from Michigan. Doesn't understand what he did. His office is going to get flooded with complaints the first snowfall. And then Robert Lee has a super chat. I've said for years, every cathedral and basilica should offer the traditional Latin Mass in Novus Ordo and let the people decide how they want to worship. I agree. I honestly think what happened is Pope Francis, during COVID, saw a huge shift of people going to the traditional Latin Mass, and I think it scared him. I think he knew that was going to win out. And so he intervened in 2021 with Traditionis Custodes. That's my belief. Maybe I'm wrong. But now that I'm seeing this report and seeing that Pope Francis actually received positive feedback and he went against it, I think he and the Cardinal Supich types panicked and said, we have to stop the traditional Latin Mass. What can we do? Francis says, I'll write the motu proprio. And they're like, do it ASAP. Go, 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 go. And he did it. Lauren, I'll trust a post-conciliar pope when he consecrates Russia with the correct formula and releases the third secret, not before then. Yeah, I mean, we need the third secret fully revealed, and we need a actual consecration of Russia as described by Lucia. Another super chat, Robert Lee. What if the Novus Ordo looked like the first Mass that Pope Leo gave at the Cardinals? Would y'all approve the Novus Ordo? It was reverent to me. So Robert Lee, I agree, it was reverent. I was very happy to see the first Mass with the reverence in the Latin that Pope Leo celebrated. It is never, within the traditional Latin Mass community, there is a tiny, I would say 2% group of people who for them the traditional Latin Mass is simply about the drip. It's simply about the aesthetics. They like the vibe, right? They're there. I've met them. They're not theologically buying into the traditional Latin Mass. They just like the drip. All right. It's not the way it looks, and it's not even about just reverence. It's about the content of the prayers, of the liturgy, and the rubrics. All right. So and I'll give you a very small example. You may think it's silly, but Pope Gregory the Great, talking about the Mass at his time, he said, the Greeks say Kyrie eleison many, many times. He said, in Rome, however, the clergy lead the lay people in saying Kyrie eleison 3 times to the Father, Christe eleison 3 times to God the Son, Christ, and Kyrie eleison 3 times to the Holy Spirit. And Pope Gregory the Great, in about 600 AD, he says that is the Roman way. That is the way it's been passed down in Rome, and that's the way we do things in Rome. So Gregory's saying there's a Trinitarian, triple, 9-fold element to this, And the Greeks do it differently, but we in Rome do it this way because this is how we have received it in Rome. So I want to do it that way. I think that's very beautiful, the way Gregory describes the Roman tradition and how it's been passed down. All right, so I think it's fair, Robert, you would say that's how we should have it. But the Novus Ordo does away with the ninefold Kyrie and does a sixfold Kyrie. It does Lord have mercy, and then the priest say Lord, or the priest says Lord have mercy, and the people say Lord have mercy. And then he says Christ have mercy, and they say Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Or they're also given the option to skip that in the Novus Ordo. That's one of about 30 examples that I could give you where the deep Roman tradition of going from a ninefold Kyrie, which has a Trinitarian element, to a sixfold Kyrie is less and it is deficient. Now, there's a lot of people who are probably laughing at me like, oh, Taylor, that's so silly. God doesn't care if you say it 6 times or 9 times. Get over yourself. Okay, that's your perspective. But I think in the church, because Pope St. Gregory the Great taught that, and it's been received for 1,969 years, maybe not that, minus 33 years for the life of Christ, for the Last Supper. I want to do it that way. That's the Roman way. And I think Pope Benedict giving us the opportunity to say, I want the ninefold Kyrie is important. There's no reason in my mind to drop the ninefold Kyrie into a sixfold Kyrie. Why? Did you save 4 seconds in the Mass? I mean, why? And then why even omit the Kyrie? So the Novus Ordo, it's not just about, oh, wow, they used incense and had pretty vestments and used a gold chalice and the altar was really pretty and there were 6 golden candlesticks. That stuff's all important and we like to see it. But at the end of the day, when we choose to go the traditional Latin Mass, we're choosing to be in the flow, in the line of the Roman rite. And that's how I see it. And I hope that's helpful. And you feel free to disagree with me. Anthony Plash, I want to have my son baptized in the old rite baptism. Can any priest, regardless of order or diocese, do it? According to Traditionis Custodes, Anthony, no. The 7 sacraments are now prohibited unless the priest has permission. So in order for it to happen, you need to have a priest who has delegation to do it. You need to go to the Fraternity of St. Peter, the Institute of Christ the King, or the Society of St. Pius X. That's how you're going to have your baby receive old baptism. And I recommend everyone to have your children, your grandchildren baptized in the pre-Vatican II rite for 2 reasons at least. Number one, in the old pre-Vatican II rite, the priest takes exorcised salt and places it on the baby's tongue. This is an exorcism of the child to remove all demonic influence, but also consecrates the child's tongue so he or she can receive the Eucharist when he or she is older. A very beautiful ritual that was removed after Vatican II. The second reason why I prefer old rite baptism for my children and not the Novus Ordo version of the baptism liturgy is that the old version, the old Latin version, has 3 exorcisms over the infant. The Novus Ordo version has 1. Again, you might laugh at me and be like, Taylor, it doesn't matter if the baby gets exorcised before baptism 3 times or 1 time. God hears us. Why do you care about all these numbers? Chill out. But I'm just saying, look, I just want the old school triple exorcism. And if you're out there and you want that as well, you have to find a priest who will give you the old rite baptism. Good question. Super chats are going off today. I can't keep up with y'all. No more super chats. I can't handle any more. I got bukus to go, and we're at 54 minutes. Louise Kuzman, do you believe the leaked report without pressure will put pressure on Pope Leo XIV to address TC? I think it will. Yeah. I think that this report was known by people in the Vatican. There was meetings about it. It was circulated. It was discussed, and then it was hushed. So people know that some trickery went on with this document. Whatever was given as recommendations to the Pope Francis, he did the opposite. I guarantee you Leo knows about it. I guarantee you that Pope Leo knows about this. I guarantee you it's an embarrassment to the Vatican right now. it puts a shadow over the legacy of Pope Francis, that he was advised by bishops, the majority of bishops, in a positive way towards the Latin Mass, and then he publicly stated he was advised to do something against the Latin Mass, and then did something very tyrannical against the Latin Mass. This is a shadow. If all of this is true, this is a shadow over the legacy of Pope Francis. Walter Collier. If the requirements for being the Pope is being Catholic man in good standing, then if everyone else on earth died, would you de facto be the Pope? No, you have to be elected by the College of Cardinals. So it's not just the last man standing, it's the man elected validly. Good question, but I would not be. Super chat from Michaela, no comment, thank you very much. Super chat from Quid Es Veritas. Malachi Martin did a talk in Detroit, it's on YouTube, almost leaking the third secret and calling out these radical bishops. Interesting, I didn't know that was at Detroit. And then our last super chat for the day, Pony Boy. St. Michael's Lent starts next month on the Assumption of Mary. It runs 40 days until the Feast of St. Michael. The rules are the same as Lent, but only as a devotion. Is this something you have done? I have not done the St. Michael's Lent. Again, this is not imposed on the church. St. Francis of Assisi did do the St. Michael Lent. And yeah, you run it from, I didn't know it was the Assumption of Mary, but yeah, it's essentially 40 days before September 29th, the Feast of St. Michael. St. Francis of Assisi actually kept 4 Lents. He kept the Great Lent, the Lent that we all know. He kept Advent as a kind of Lent. He kept St. Michael's Lent, and there was a fourth one. Can't remember what it was, but I remember reading about St. Francis keeping 4 Lents. Very interesting. All right, well, I will make sure you're subscribed. I will be following up with this. I already reached out to Diane Montana and thanked her for this report. It is big news. It gives us a whole new angle, a whole new lens to the pontificate of Pope Francis. It shows that he was being advised one way by the majority and he was acting in a contrarian way. That doesn't surprise me. We've also seen that he was seeing a psychiatrist. He was on psychological medications. These are also now being really, I don't know if they're true or not, but we're starting to get a different picture of Pope Francis and what made him tick and why he did the things he did. So I expect that as we get further away from the death and the passing of Pope Francis, perhaps more people will be talking about and revealing things that went on during his 12-year pontificate. So if you want to stay abreast of everything, please subscribe, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button for notifications. Make sure you like this video. If you haven't, how many people have liked? Okay, there's 3,817 people watching live. 479 of you have liked this video. That's like, what is that? I'm just going off the top of my head here. That's not even 20% of you. Why have less than 20% of you hit the like button? Just hit the like button. It's just kind of like, thank you, hit the button, like, hit the like. Let's mash the like button. And then if you want to support this channel, you can do so at Patreon, patreon.com/Dr. Taylor Marshall. I'll send you a rosary, send you some signed books. You'll be part of helping me keeping the show going and writing books like Christian Patriot. If you like the stuff I do, please support me at Patreon, patreon.com/Dr. Taylor Marshall, and I'll send you some merch. I'll send you some books to show my gratitude towards you. Hey, if you're watching and you haven't been to a traditional Latin Mass, I challenge you to go to a Latin Mass for 4 times. Doesn't have to be 4 times in a row, but go 4 times. After you've been to Latin Mass 4 times, you're going to be like, I'm starting to get this. This is interesting. Kind of like this. This is good. So that's my Latin Mass challenge. Go 4 times to the traditional Latin Mass and see what it's all about. See what people are talking about. Make sure you're praying your rosary every single blessed day. If you don't pray the rosary every day, you're not on the team. The Blessed Virgin Mary descended from heaven to Fatima, Portugal, and she asked you to pray 5 decades of the rosary every day. Please do it. Please pray the rosary every single day. All right, thanks for watching. Please visit our sponsors. Check out the sponsor today for the liver health formula. Please check out New St. Thomas Institute and take my course on the traditional Latin Mass. please pre-order some copies of ChristianPatriotBook.com. And remember, our Lord Jesus Christ says you're the light of the world and the salt of the earth. So go out there and be salty. God bless and Godspeed, and pray for His Holiness Pope Leo XIV.